Hello, Peter.
Hi, how's it going?
Super nice to finally have you up. I am so sorry. We've been trying to read this for a while,
I know it's taken us a little while, but yeah, finally we've got there.
and you're especially, I would say, expert on the politics of the UK.
Well, I don't know. Expert is a big word, but no, I've been around the block a little while. But yeah, I've worked in Parliament, for government, for civil service. I've been everywhere, so I'm one of those kind of. I know how the sausage is made, people.
But let's discuss the global situation for a while first, and what I, as a Ukrainian, face myself when I speak about the global situation, and when I discuss Trump, when I discuss Russia and Ukraine war. I'm always faced with this reaction, especially when I'm in London, when I'm in the university. I'm always faced with this reaction that people say that the world is the history is repeating itself.
Hmm.
It's almost for them like it's two authoritarian rulers now in power, Trump and Putin, trying to divide the world in a similar way that Stalin and Hitler did back in the days. What would you say to people like that?
Well, it's always one of those things, isn't it? The one thing from history we never learn is, we never learn from it. But it is one of those interesting things that I think the way that people are doing and coming up with these ideas is that they're trying to understand the world in what has been, rather than accepting that we're in a new situation. This isn't history repeating itself. It might look like it that way, but there are major factors that are really playing an influence here that didn't exist 40, 50 years ago. One of the ones that we're really looking at now is this rare minerals deal.
It came all of a sudden.
Yeah, now you can say it's about resources and talking about in a broader sense, but the fight for these essential minerals has been an international issue for 20 years. The problem is most people haven't been paying attention. So this is a huge problem that we have in politics is engagement rate. So people only kind of kick into politics when something massive happens, like a war or somebody dies or there's an election. Unfortunately, in between those things, big and important things happen. And if you're not paying attention to it, it can look like, oh my God, this just came out of nowhere. And it's not. A lot of this stuff has been predictable. A lot of us have been in the political community. We've been talking about it for a long time. Just trying to get the public engaged with that is often the big challenge in politics. But I think that's true no matter where you live these days. But, we're looking at the global scene now. Yes, I am very, very concerned. I think we are on the precipice of a major incident, whether that's going to be a war, an even bigger war than we're already seeing, or whether we're going to see a kind of new Cold War seep in. This seems to be a new common thought, but I look at this as a kind of moment in history where we will look back on it and say, this is when it all started. Not this is when it ends or this is halfway through. This is when it starts. This is the one thing I've been trying and I've been hammering it home in every interview I've ever given is that what we're seeing now is not an end to war. It is the precursor to a much bigger thing. And sadly, Ukraine has been on the front line of that, as the same way that Israel is on the front lines of that against radical Islam. And there's lots of these little skirmishes happening around the world. But I do think that we're going to start seeing a kind of consolidation of sides and a much bigger conflict start to arise. But how that conflict is going to kind of spell out itself, I don't know yet. Most people seem to think it's some kind of invasion and some massive war like that. I'm not convinced. I actually think it will be lots of skirmishes, lots of little wars, lots of big kind of confrontations, but in little ways, which I think is what we'll probably see, because let's not forget nuclear weapons are still a factor and the West is not in the game at the moment. Russia, I think they're a little overhyped in terms of their preparedness levels. China, of course, it is always the big specter in the room, but in reality, they have a huge economic crisis on their hands that nobody's really talking about. But yeah, there's a lot of factors at play and a lot of things, a lot of moving parts. But I don't know. It is one of those incidences right now that I do think by the time we're well collecting our pension, we'll say this is when it started.
And what makes this scary, particularly for me, as a Ukrainian, relying on the EU, for example, to defend our country, relying on them to provide us enough to defend ourselves, is that we have never seen NATO in a war like this. So we don't really. Many people say that NATO is much stronger than Russia, but remember the kind of idea we had of Russia before the war with Ukraine. We thought it's much stronger than the reality is. There was a lot of corruption and probably a lot of money that was supposed to be spent on new weaponry didn't actually.
Yeah, no, you're perfectly right there, you know.
So with NATO, I don't know how strong is it as a defensive alliance, and as many people are relying on it now is scary.
I think you're right. I think you're right. And this is where I actually agree with Donald Trump when he said, well, what's the point of NATO? This comment that he made was taken radically out of context. If you actually listen to the full thing, what he's actually saying is, well, what is its purpose as a defense pact, which is what it is? Is it, are we a proactive defense pact, or is it going to be an invasionary organization? Is it just purely defense? Is it? That's kind of what he was saying, because you're right. We've never seen NATO in the 21st century. We've never seen it actually have to really get involved in global affairs in this way like we're seeing now. Now, of course, we've seen other instances in the past where it's been NATO, but realistically now is a very unique thing. But the advantage you have with just being a single power like Russia is there's not that many cooks in the room. The problem of NATO, as we've seen the problems of the EU, the problems of the UN, too many cooks spoil the broth. You know, there's too many voices, there's too many indecisions being kind of made because they can't all get in the same room. They can't all agree with each other. We saw that really, really clearly when it came to the EU's reaction to the invasion of Ukraine. You know, that the fact that they were barely present for 3-4 months at the very start of this 3 years ago is staggering to me. But it doesn't surprise me because people can't agree with each other, because whilst it talks a good game about being unified, just like NATO, just like the UN, just like the World Health, all these things, the reality is they are just as divided, they are just as individualistic as everything else. The great lie, as I've been calling it, is the idea that we have become more cooperative. I actually think that the truth is that we are more selfish, more individualistic, and we act more in political realism than we ever have done. Because once we talk a good game, the reality is all we ever do is react in nation state interests. There is no kind of, let's put this all to one side and all hold hands. That just doesn't exist in real life. You know, if you just pull back the curtain, you see the Wizard of Oz. You know, it's not all it's cracked up to be, and there's a lot of shortcomings. You're right about Russia being overhyped. Let's not forget Putin said it would take 2 weeks to end the war in Russia. 3 days. I said 3 days. 3 days was one or two. You know, 3 days. Oh my God.
No, that's ridiculous.
But it was a ridiculous statement to make. But I do think what's more ridiculous is the number of people that took that to be true. And though, well, you know,
you have to hype your army to a certain extent.
Well, this is very true. That's very true. But then they also have to have a little bit of realism in the room. And that's the big thing for me. Like, let's just be realistic. But yeah, it is a fascinating situation in terms of what NATO will be and where NATO will go. I've worked with NATO in the past. They're a great organization and it's a great idea. But we are now in a world where you've got Donald Trump, you've got Keir Starmer, you've got the European Union all at each other's throats. I mean, let's just look at the new German Chancellor, for example. He has turned directly towards Europe, not the United States. That is a huge thing that will impact global politics for decades. You know, we live in a very German-dominated Europe, and unfortunately, that's not always been the best things when it comes to defense and it comes to security. However, you know, the influence of domestic stuff on NATO will be fascinating, but a lot of this will be played out. A lot of it, I don't like to make predictions, but I do think eventually they will get their act together because necessity will meet it. It's not because it wants to do it, it's that it needs to do it. But I just don't know where this is all going to end. I hopefully will be the winners, but I don't know.
And what the victory will look like.
That is always
very interesting.
That is the big thing when it comes to the issue of Ukraine. Nobody ever told the public what winning would look like.
Well, for us, it was taking back all the territory invaded. But now that we're starting to see that this is very hard, with the support we're getting currently, with many countries kind of being tired and saying, you need to wrap this up, you need to wrap this up. And we need no less support than we have received previously to win the war.
Yeah.
So, in my opinion, there are only 2 options existing.
Yeah.
Either you fund, help us, because you know we're not able to win just with what we have at hand. Either you fund us, trust us, and we will make progress, or you will not fund, not not trust us, and then you will push for negotiation. But as mostly Biden, I would say, and Europe has been choosing the position, which I can kind of understand out of their own benefit. They wouldn't want to pull themselves in the war directly with Russia. I can understand that. Um, but at the same time, as they're in between these two positions, I can't see how this is going to positively end in the Ukraine in this scenario.
Yes, I completely agree with you. And it's been a big problem around the world is what I call one foot in, one foot out. You either get involved or you don't. And this kind of, we'll give you a little bit here, we'll give you a little bit there. This kind of piecemeal funding and piecemeal aid has been a major detriment to Ukraine, to the war in Ukraine, and not just there, but it's been a big factor as to why Israel and Palestine and the Gaza situation has blown up, why most of the Middle East is a catastrophe, why most foreign policy directed by the West has been wrong for about 40 years, is because we've never actually fully committed to something. We always seem to pull back when we should push forward. I'm not an advocate of war. I think wars are not just bad economics, but they're just bad in general. But also, sometimes they are a necessity because you have to pick goodies and baddies. You have to pick a side. You have to get involved. And the West has not got involved in the way that it should have and given support to Ukraine like it said, again, taught a good game. I mean, over here, you couldn't move for support for Ukraine for the first year. Honestly, I remember being outside the Russian embassy. It was wall to wall press coverage every single minute. And then it just disappeared because this went on longer than it was expected because nobody really said what a wedding looked like. This seemed to be a lot more complex. And because of this kind of not really fully committing, I think that has dragged this on. But it is a huge problem that the West is somewhat scared of conflict. It's scared of defending itself. It's scared of putting itself forward and saying we're the right people, we're in the right. And that is a big problem. I think a lot of it has to do with decolonization, the idea of managed decline and all this kind of stuff, and often fifth column activists within our own countries talking the country down, I think is a big problem. But we really do have to get to grips with this because, like I said, something is coming. What, I don't know, but I do feel that we aren't ready because of this one foot in, one foot out, and we're just not willing to really put our, morals and values and principles on the line. I'm rather a little sick and tired of a lot of people calling themselves patriots. That the moment we suddenly have to defend things and actually get into a war and actually, sadly people will die and there will be blood and sweat and tears and turmoil and heartbreak. Unfortunately, those people, where are they? They say, oh no, we need to give in, we need to surrender, we need to do this. No, we don't. What we should be doing is pushing forward and actually defending the values that we say we have. Because there are people in the world that want to take them away, whether they do it by force or however they choose to do it. We have to start getting in the fight. We have to start defending our values because we know what they are. I go back to Kemi Badenoch not so long ago, gave a speech where she said it was weakness that has got us here. And I think she's bang on that it is weakness that we did not fully support Ukraine. It is weakness that we have not supported Israel. It is weakness that we have allowed what I think is 87 million asylum seekers into Europe. It is weakness that we have funded DEI over defense. It is weakness that has really led us to the world that we're in. This is not like an unpredictable moment. Like I say, everything was logical to end here because if you take your foot off the gas, the car will stop. And unfortunately, Europe just got out of the car. It's not even driving anymore. Europe spent more time trying to define what a woman is than realizing that Russia's on its front doorstep.
I feel like if you don't have enemies to fight, you start kind of creating a fight inside yourself.
Yeah, but the problem is with the enemies have always existed. The idea that war...
They're just not close.
They're just not close, and wars are fought in different ways. Not all armies have uniforms. Is a quote by an American general. I can't remember which one, and he's talking about terrorist cells and terrorist organizations, for example. We know what they are. Well, they're a non-state action. We try and academic our way out of it. Well, the reality is it is an enemy. And we have to start treating it as an enemy. China is an enemy. Russia is an enemy. The way that they react to us is not friendly. It is not in good. You wouldn't do it to a friend personally. So why do we treat it any different? Yes, there is economics impacting the global economy and all of that stuff.
Especially with China.
Especially with
Right.
China. Well, let's look at China. China attacks the UK every single day, thousands of times. How? Cyber attacks. Do you think all these hospitals suddenly losing power and suddenly having all these hacks is by accident? Of course it isn't. China pays hacktivist groups to do this stuff. That is a direct attack, whether you want to call it that or not. And unfortunately, the West's reaction is, "Oh, please don't hurt us. Please don't do this." Stand up for yourselves, because this is what happens. You get a person like Putin who sees an opportunity and he just waltzes right in, literally into Europe. And, whether he continues his advance, I'm not so sure. But his influence and in what I've been calling the Russian infection in that region, in terms of its influence in elections and having the pro-Russia candidate and all that kind of stuff, is not going to end. It's only going to step up now. No matter what we see now, this was an appeasement. This was a capitulation of morals and principles. And unfortunately, it is letting down a great not a great ally, but a great ally of the UK and of Europe, Ukraine. And we've done the same to Israel. We've done the same to Israel. It is absolutely despicable because we are scared. We're scared of actually doing anything. And because, unfortunately, our inactions have led to terrible consequences.
And this is what these dictators are scared of. This is what the terrorism is scared of. Europe, this fearless version of Europe, fearless version of the West. And I feel like if Europe and the West had actually provided a proper response to Russian invasion, it would have been much more secure than the situation we're in now. But I think one of the main decisions here, as a conservative in this country, especially being living in London, one of the main decisions you have to make is either you support Trump or you don't.
Oh,
That's another thing. Like, so as a conservative, it's so complicated, and people don't understand that while I might support him in one regard, in another regard, when he's going to do an outrageous thing 2 weeks later, or to say an outrageous thing, I might not actually support him because he's not a consistent politician.
no.
What he says usually first does not lead to action.
That's fair.
Second, usually goes into the media under the strategy of flooding the zone. And third is usually just talk and negotiations and strategies, different kind of strategies that he uses. So with Donald Trump, it's hard to be a conservative nowadays and picking a side in this, realizing that you don't even know what Trump stands for nowadays.
Yes. So I don't think Donald Trump knows what Donald Trump stands for, but I say that in a positive way. I remember when Donald Trump came down the golden escalator at Trump Tower in 2015 and announced his presidency for the United States, and I said, that man's just won the presidency. I was sat with my father, who's political as well, and he just said, absolutely not, don't be daft. I lost more friends in 2015 and 2016 than I've ever lost in my life, and trust me, I'm pretty good at that, because I would said Donald Trump is going to win, and everyone's like, no, he's not, he's a racist, he's this, he's that, he's this. I said, but Donald Trump is going to win. And the reality is, when it comes to Donald Trump, you take what he says at face value, but you don't take him literally. In other words, there is always a bigger plan. And I've come to be annoyed with the idea that you have to be either support Donald Trump or you don't like him at all. This kind of dichotomy has to stop in our politics. We see it with Nigel Farage, we see it with Jeremy Corbyn, Keir Starmer, Kevin Bidot, everybody. You can like bits of somebody and dislike other bits of them. Also, you have to stop calling people tyrants and dictators, because when we do see a tyrant and a dictator like Putin, and it doesn't mean anything. The word fascist doesn't mean anything anymore. And thank you very much, left, for that. When we do actually have fascists, we can't call them that because, well, everyone's a fascist. But the situation with Donald Trump has always been interesting for me, because I understand why he's a thing. I understand how he became a thing. But him actually governing is interesting this time around than last time. In 2016, it was chaos. It was the circus came to town. Trying to get anything done in America or to do with an American firm was impossible, because they didn't know what was going on. We didn't know what was going on. It was a nightmare. This is why I'm 34 and look like this. It is just stressful beyond belief. But this time around, It is organized, it is sharp, and it's not taking prisoners, and it means what it says. So I look at the certain appointments. The chief of staff, for example, she is a battle axe of a woman. She knows what she's doing. There's no, oh, we're sorry, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. There is, we're doing this. This is a very marked tone difference in Donald Trump and the entire administration. They are pulling back things. They're doing a lot of it by executive order, obviously, because of the Republican majority. Well, it is very clear to see that Donald Trump is in control this time. There is no, oh, he's got handlers, oh, he's got this. None of that rhetoric's around anymore. Or none of that kind of, oh, don't worry, he's got generals or will never do. No. Donald Trump is in control. And I mean, in control. It is fascinating to see that real difference in the way that his administration is run. But in terms of it, in looking at it in the international sense, Trump likes stability. Trump hates war. He hates invasions. He is not a wartime president. I can only imagine he actually hates everything that's going on right now because he's America first. He wants to fix America.
And he's looking how to solve that.
Yes. And I actually think a lot of this is he wants to get back to America, so he's going to have to fix the world first. And I think we look at Heske, the new defense secretary. I think he makes a really good point. He goes back to, it's actually an Eisenhower quote, but he goes on about how Uncle Sam can't be Uncle Sucker. In other words, America can't be the one picking up the bill all the time. America can't be the world's police. It can't be the world's defense fund. Yes, it should play a major role in that. And it is the world's leading economy. It's the world's leading defense force. However, Europe's got to pick up its own bill every now and then. Europe's got to start doing its bit. The world has to start doing its part. And it can't just be on the Americans and the American administration to keep paying for everything and doing all of this stuff. I think Trump is perfectly right there. And this kind of knee-jerk reaction that he's pulling out of NATO, he's pulling for all funding, he's not. He's merely saying, step up. And I think that is the big thing about what we saw. Particularly, I tell you now, with the J.D. Vance speech at the Munich Security Conference, that the way he called out countries to their faces was incredible. I mean, I've got a lot of friends who work at the UN, and I was there for a little bit, but that sent shockwaves around that building, around the EU, and even around Westminster. Everyone was like, did he actually just say that? In terms of
You don't have reacted to this very, very different.
very differently, and
And actually, people I have as friends, they were not happy with how he was doing.
because nobody ever likes their own hypocrisy shown out to them. They talk a good game, but when you actually see what has actually happened, when we talk about the decline in free speech, when we talk about the decline of defense spending around Europe, but then when your own country is name checked, some people do get, offended by it, but you should be asking, why is he name checked it? Not, why has he said that? Why you should say what he said is not inaccurate. So you should say, the question should always be, why has he said this? How have we got this so wrong? Throughout history, you can't help but notice that it takes an American to come to Europe to kind of remind us all, this is what you're supposed to stand for. I always find that fascinating. We saw it with JFK, we saw it with Ronald Reagan, we saw it with lots of different kind of leaders in lots of different movements. I have to keep reminding you, you're supposed to stand for freedom. You're supposed to stand for liberty. You're supposed to believe in this stuff. Actually defend it. Actually do something and promote it. And it again, I go back to this point. It is a weakness. It's our internal nature and the navel gazing, I think we call it, of, oh, America will do it. America will do it. That kind of lazy arrogance, I think, is just wrong. And we're starting to see the consequences of it when an American president actually has the gall to say, no, you're paying the bill this time. Isn't it really funny that the minute Trump said that, Keir Starmer here in the UK, he's just put up our defense. He's just managed to find all this extra funding for defense.
Because now he has to.
Because he has to. And that's the point, The vanity projects of European nations will start to disappear, and actually we'll get back to bread and butter issues like defense, because that's what we should have been focusing on. We have been able to indulge ourselves because somebody else picked up the bill. Now things have to change, and I think it's change that is needed, and it's change that should have happened about 20 years ago.
But I'm curious, having discussed the role that the US played, such a massive global role that it has nowadays. What's the role of the UK now? The country that was once perceived as the biggest, the strongest empire back at the day. Now, to many people, it seems like it has pretty small role on the global scale.
Yeah.
Is that true or not?
You couldn't actually be more wrong on that one because it's a great irony. Spent a lot of time in America, a lot of time with Americans, and they always say the only people that don't believe Britain is a global power are the British.
Mm.
Like, people forget our influence is absolutely everywhere. Everywhere, in every corner of the world, whether it be through international organizations or through our own efforts and our own kind of what we call soft power.
So the question is that the legacy of what has been done, or is that what's the UK represented?
I think it's a bit of both, I think. And obviously our influence because of our historical past is undeniable. However, our ability to take that and turn it into what we have now, I think is a marked skill by the Foreign Office and many foreign secretaries, much better than the one we've got now. But I do think that our influence is declining a little bit because we're choosing to pull back yet again. People always say, we pulled back because of Brexit. We pulled back years before that. Britain, the reason that George W. Bush, for example, was so adamant about getting Tony Blair involved was because once the British are involved, it has a mark of respectability. The minute a British kind of envoy is sent to something or is involved in some kind of international project, it is raised above, it is elevated on the world stage because we don't do things half measure. We get involved and we usually have a lot of global expertise. Our armies train other armies. We've got a great science and technology sector here in the UK that, we lead the world in many tech sector areas. And, we are a country of experts, for want of a better phrase, but there are certain aspects that we've allowed to decline, that we've not really kept up with. Well, we keep harking back and we keep allowing our kind of colonial past to haunt us. And I often call what I call the specter of Iraq. It plays a big factor. In other words, we're haunted by the mistakes of Iraq. And because of that, we've stopped doing a lot of things. I think that's true of the West and America in particular. And France as well plays a big factor in that. But I do think because of our failures not so long ago, we're a bit scared about trying to get involved. And actually what I think we need to do is kind of shake that off. Say, look, we got some things right, we got some things wrong, and you've got to move forward. We keep replaying the nightmare. We keep always saying, yeah, well, what about Iraq? What about Afghanistan in the end now? And all those kind of things. There were good things that came out of those situations. We have to take the good positives, learn from the negatives, and put our, dust ourselves off and get back up and get back in the game. We don't bat 100, but we're pretty close to it. And again, Britain continually puts itself down. I don't know why we do that as a nation. It's a very British thing to do. I think it was George Orwell that said British academics are the only people that loathe the country that they're from. But in other words, that they always feel the need to apologize for being British, apologize for being English or Scottish or whatever. That kind of, I'm sorry. That, we joke about it, that we apologize so much. But it is so inbuilt to us that we don't want to irritate anybody. We don't want to bother anybody.
Something that I can't get used to. Yeah, I just can't.
I was born and raised here, and trust me, I can't get used to it either. And I'm like, why is everybody apologizing to everybody? You didn't. But it's just what we say and how we are. But I do think we have to stop saying sorry. And actually, if you do, realistically, if you do want to stop saying sorry, but you actually want to apologize, you apologize in my world by doing things, by making things better, by trying to atone, not by apologizing, but atoning and saying, look, we got this wrong, but here's what we're going to do instead. So say, for example, on reparations and slavery, giving money away, fine. What we could try and do is end modern slavery.